December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii. The oil-slicked water still burned. 7 battleships sat on the harbor bottom or listed uselessly against their moorings. 2,403 Americans dead. Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo's carriers steamed westward, having delivered what Japanese planners believed was a death blow to American Pacific power. In Madrid, Spanish naval attaches, some of the world's most respected neutral observers of naval warfare, compiled their annual assessment of global maritime capacity. Their report on American shipbuilding potential would later become infamous for its precision and its catastrophic misunderstanding. The United States possesses 8 shipyards theoretically capable of capital ship construction, the report noted with clinical detachment. Given documented construction times of 36 to 48 months per fleet carrier, and accounting for material priorities divided between Atlantic and Pacific theaters, American carrier replacement capacity cannot exceed 4 to 5 hulls annually under optimal conditions. The math seemed irrefutable. The Americans had lost the Lexington at Coral Sea, the Yorktown at Midway, the Wasp and Hornet in the Solomon Islands campaign. By late 1942, the U.S. Pacific Fleet was down to 3 operational fleet carriers: Enterprise, Saratoga, and the recently commissioned Essex. Rear Admiral Matomu Ugaki, Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet, wrote in his diary on October 26, 1942, "The Americans fight bravely with what they have, but they cannot build fast enough to replace their losses. Each carrier we sink is a victory that compounds. Time favors Japan." The Spanish analysts had done their homework. They knew American shipyards. They had studied capacity utilization rates at Newport News, Brooklyn Navy Yard, Philadelphia, and Norfolk. They understood steel allocation priorities, dry dock availability, and skilled labor constraints. What they counted were yards. 8 yards. Maybe 10 if they were generous. What they didn't count, what no one in history had ever seen before, was what happens when an entire continental economy stops pretending peace exists and starts building like the future of civilization depends on it. The Essex-class carrier program, authorized in 1940, seemed modest enough on paper. The first hull, CV-9 Essex, was laid down at Newport News Shipbuilding on April 28, 1941. Standard naval construction doctrine suggested delivery in mid to late 1944. She commissioned on December 31, 1942. 20 months from keel to combat-ready. "Impossible," declared veteran British naval constructor Sir Stanley Goodall, reviewing the American timeline. "Either their quality control is criminally negligent, or they're reporting false data. No one builds a 27,000-ton capital ship in under 3 years. It violates every principle of naval architecture." The Japanese Naval General Staff agreed. Their intelligence estimates, cross-referenced with Spanish and British assessments, predicted maximum American carrier availability in 1944 at 8 to 9 fleet carriers total across both oceans. They were counting yards. They should have been counting resolve. By January 1943, 3 Essex-class carriers were fitting out simultaneously. Yorktown II, CV-10, Intrepid, CV-11, and Hornet II, CV-12, each named to replace a fallen sister, were in various stages of completion at 3 different yards. The Spanish attaches revised their estimates upward. Perhaps the Americans could manage 6 or 7 carriers by 1945. Impressive, certainly. Concerning, even. Still manageable. What Admiral Ugaki and the Spanish analysts shared was a failure of imagination rooted in conventional experience. They understood naval construction as they had always known it: deliberate, sequential, constrained by limited industrial capacity and specialized facilities. They were analyzing a 19th-century process trying to measure a 20th-century revolution. The Americans weren't building carriers the way navies had always built carriers. They were building carriers the way Henry Ford built automobiles. Mass production, interchangeable parts, parallel construction, and an assembly line mentality applied to 30,000-ton warships. Specifications that seemed like weaknesses were actually revolutionary advantages. Length, 872 feet, 265.8 meters, longer than any previous American carrier beam, 93 feet, 28.3 meters, wide enough for massive elevator systems displacement. 27,100 tons standard, 36,380 tons fully loaded armor. 4-inch belt, 3-inch deck, inadequate by battleship standards. But it allowed faster construction power plant, 150,000 shaft horsepower, underpowered compared to Japanese contemporary speed, 33 knots, merely adequate aircraft capacity, 90 to 100 aircraft, unremarkable. Every limitation was actually a standardization choice. Every compromise was a production accelerator. The Essex class wasn't designed to be the perfect carrier. It was designed to be the carrier you could build 17 of in 3 years. British Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, observing American construction methods in late 1942, wrote to the Admiralty, "The Americans are doing something we told them was impossible. They aren't building better, they're building faster. And in war, faster compounds." In Tokyo, the Imperial Japanese Navy's planning staff still projected American carrier strength at 9 hulls by mid-1944. In Berlin, Kriegsmarine Intelligence estimated 8 to 10 American fleet carriers operational by 1945. In Madrid, the Spanish naval attaches prepared to revise their estimates again. They were still counting yards. The Americans were counting shifts. April 15, 1943. Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Virginia. USS Bunker Hill, CV-17, slid down the ways, her hull glistening with fresh paint. She had been laid down exactly 11 months earlier. 11 months from first steel to launch, a timeline that would have been considered fantasy in 1940. She wasn't alone. On that same day, at Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, USS Shangri-La, CV-38, was having her keel laid. At Bethlehem Steel's Fore River Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts, USS Boxer, CV-21, was being fitted out. At Newport News, USS Ticonderoga, CV-14, was in final assembly. 4 Essex-class carriers in 4 different stages of construction at 4 different yards on the same day. The Spanish Naval Attache's April 1943 report reflected growing alarm. American carrier construction has exceeded all historical precedent. Current projections suggest 12 to 14 fleet carriers operational by year's end 1944. This represents industrial capacity previously thought impossible to achieve. They were getting warmer. But they still didn't understand the full scope. The first real shock came at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 19 to 20, 1944, known to American pilots as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet sailed into battle with 9 carriers, the entire operational strength of Japanese naval aviation. Against them, Task Force 58, commanded by Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher. Ozawa expected to face perhaps 6 or 7 American carriers, maybe 8 at the outside. He faced 15. 8 of them were Essex-class, all built since Pearl Harbor. Essex, CV-9, Yorktown, CV-10, Intrepid, CV-11, Hornet, CV-12, Lexington, CV-16, Bunker Hill, CV-17, Wasp, CV-18, Cabot, CV-28, a light carrier, but Essex production methods. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, a veteran Japanese pilot who survived the battle, later recalled, "We had been told the Americans could not replace their losses. When we saw the horizon filled with carriers, we knew someone had lied to us. Or perhaps our intelligence had simply stopped counting." The battle lasted 2 days. The Americans lost 130 aircraft. The Japanese lost 645 aircraft and 3 carriers. But the numbers that really mattered were industrial, not tactical. During those 2 days in June 1944, while the battle raged in the Philippine Sea, USS Bon Richard, CV-31, was launched at Brooklyn Navy Yard. USS Antietam, CV-36, was under construction at Philadelphia. USS Princeton, CV-37, was being fitted out at Philadelphia. USS Tarawa, CV-40, had her keel laid at Norfolk. The Americans lost 130 aircraft in combat. In the same 48-hour period, American factories produced over 200 replacement aircraft. Japanese Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, architect of the kamikaze strategy, understood the mathematics before most of his colleagues. We are not fighting a navy. We are fighting a factory. And the factory builds faster than we can destroy. The production statistics told a story that naval theorists had never contemplated. Construction time acceleration. Essex, CV, 9-20 months keel to commissioning Yorktown, CV, 10-16 months Intrepid, CV, 11-18 months Bunker Hill, CV, 17-16 months Hancock, CV, 19-14 months Bon Richard, CV, 31-15 months. The Americans weren't just building fast. They were getting faster. What made this possible? The techniques that couldn't work for capital ships. Prefabrication. Hull sections built in inland facilities, transported to yards by rail and barge. Modular construction. Entire compartments assembled with piping, wiring, and equipment already installed. Parallel production. Multiple sections built simultaneously, then joined. Standardized components. Every Essex-class carrier used identical parts, from door handles to fire control systems. Shift work. 24-hour construction schedules, 3 shifts of workers welding instead of riveting. Faster. Lighter, stronger, and teachable to workers in weeks instead of years. At the peak of production in mid-1944, Newport News Shipbuilding employed over 31,000 workers on carrier construction alone. Brooklyn Navy Yard, 28,000. Philadelphia, 24,000. These weren't traditional naval shipwrights. They were farmers from Iowa, teachers from Ohio, housewives from Pennsylvania, trained in weeks, building in months what had traditionally taken years. Commander Joseph Wiley, a U.S. Navy liaison officer to British shipyards, reported back to Washington, "The Royal Navy can't believe our numbers. They think we're double-counting or including light carriers in fleet carrier totals. When I show them the hull numbers and commissioning dates, they ask to see our quality control failures. They cannot accept that mass production methods work on capital ships." Quality control was actually exceptional. The Essex class suffered remarkably few construction defects. Standardization meant problems identified on one hull could be corrected across the entire production run instantly. When USS Franklin, CV-13, was hit by 2 Japanese bombs off Leyte in October 1944, suffering catastrophic damage and 724 dead, she didn't sink. Her modular construction and damage control design, built into every Essex-class carrier, saved her. She was repaired and back in action within 6 months. The Japanese Taiho, newest, most advanced carrier in the Imperial Japanese Navy, was sunk by a single submarine torpedo at the Philippine Sea. Poor damage control, inadequate compartmentalization, catastrophic design flaw. One ship took 2 bombs and 724 casualties and survived. One ship took 1 torpedo and exploded. The difference wasn't courage or luck. It was industrial philosophy translated into steel. By the end of 1944, the Spanish naval attaches issued their final assessment. American carrier construction has produced 17 fleet carriers of the Essex class in 36 months, with an additional 7 units in various stages of completion. This industrial achievement has no historical precedent and represents a fundamental shift in naval power projection capability. 17 carriers in 3 years. The analysts who counted yards finally understood they should have been counting will. October 24, 1944. Leyte Gulf, Philippines. The largest naval battle in history was about to demonstrate exactly what 17 carriers, and the industrial ecosystem that created them, could do to a navy that couldn't replace its losses. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force steamed toward San Bernardino Strait with 4 battleships, including the monstrous Yamato and Musashi, each displacing 72,000 tons, mounting 9 18.1-inch guns, the most powerful battleships ever built. Against them, Task Force 38, commanded by Admiral William Bull Halsey. The American force that morning included Essex, CV-9, Intrepid, CV-11, Lexington, CV-16, Bunker Hill, CV-17, Wasp, CV-18, Hornet, CV-12, Hancock, CV-19, Enterprise, CV-6, the Old Warrior plus escort carriers and cruisers. 8 Essex-class carriers in one task force. More carrier tonnage than the entire Imperial Japanese Navy possessed at that moment. The battle began with American search planes locating Kurita's force. Within hours, wave after wave of American aircraft, launched from carriers built in Philadelphia, New York, Norfolk, and Quincy, swarmed the Japanese fleet. Musashi absorbed an estimated 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits over 4 hours before capsizing. Her sister Yamato, designed to withstand anything the world could throw at her, turned back under the sheer weight of American air power. But the real story wasn't tactical. It was mathematical. Lieutenant Commander John Montserrat, operations officer on Essex, later described the systematic destruction. "We didn't fight a battle. We processed targets. Launch aircraft, strike, recover, rearm, launch again. We were a factory floor that happened to float. And we never stopped producing." During the 4-day Battle of Leyte Gulf, American carriers launched over 2,400 sorties. They lost 162 aircraft in combat. In the same 4 days, American factories produced over 600 replacement aircraft. The carriers that launched those strikes could rearm and resupply from fleet train logistics vessels, tankers, ammunition ships, repair ships, all purpose-built for sustained operations. The Japanese lost 4 carriers at Leyte Gulf: Zuikaku, Zuho, Chitose, and Chiyoda. They couldn't replace a single one. The industrial mathematics were crushing. American carrier construction 1943 to 1945. 1943, 6 Essex-class carriers commissioned 1944, 9 Essex-class carriers commissioned 1945, 4 Essex-class carriers commissioned, war ended before more completed, total, 17 Essex-class fleet carriers in 39 months. Japanese carrier construction 1943 to 1945. 1943, 3 carriers commissioned, including conversions, 1944. 4 carriers commissioned, mostly converted merchantmen, 1945. 2 carriers commissioned, neither operationally effective, total, 9 carriers, most inferior to Essex class, none replaceable after losses. But carriers were just the visible tip of the industrial avalanche. Supporting infrastructure the Essex class needed: aircraft production, fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers. 1943, 47,836 aircraft, all types, 1944, 74,098 aircraft 1945, 46,001 aircraft, war ended August, total, 167,935 aircraft in 3 years. Pilot training. Naval Air Training Command processed 60,000 pilots 1942-1945 when a carrier air group was decimated. A replacement air group was already trained. Japanese pilot losses were irreplaceable. American losses were statistical noise. Logistics vessels built to support carrier operations: 18 fleet oilers, Cimarron class, 24 ammunition ships, 35 replenishment ships, 53 escort carriers, to ferry aircraft and provide ASW. The Americans didn't build a carrier fleet. They built an industrial ecosystem that happened to include carriers. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had died in 1943, had warned before Pearl Harbor, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." He understood something his successors forgot: America's strength wasn't its navy. It was its industrial capacity to build navies faster than Japan could sink them. By March 1945, Task Force 58 operated off the coast of Japan with 16 carriers, 11 of them Essex class. They weren't raiding. They weren't skirmishing. They were parking off the enemy coast, daring what remained of Japanese naval aviation to come out. Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fukuda, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, witnessed Task Force 58 from the shore. We had awakened a beast we could not kill. Every ship we sank, 2 appeared. Every aircraft we shot down, 10 replaced it. We didn't lose the war at Midway or Leyte. We lost it the day we attacked a nation that could build Essex-class carriers the way we built bicycles. Final operational statistics of the Essex class in World War II. 17 commissioned before war's end. 0 lost to enemy action, though several heavily damaged. Participated in every major Pacific operation from Gilbert Islands onward. Aircraft sorties launched. Over 120,000 combat missions. Enemy vessels sunk by Essex-class air groups. Estimated 600-plus ships. Operational availability. Average 85% plus throughout the war. Compare this to Japanese carrier operations 1944 to 1945. Sporadic, defensive, ultimately futile. By 1945, Japan possessed carrier hulls but no aircraft, or aircraft but no pilots, or pilots but no fuel. The Americans had everything, simultaneously, continuously. When USS Lake Champlain, CV-39, commissioned on June 3, 1945, she was the 17th Essex-class carrier. The war in the Pacific would end 10 weeks later. She never fired a shot in anger. She didn't need to. Her very existence, the fact that she could be built at all, that America could commission its 17th fleet carrier of one class while the enemy couldn't replace a single loss, was a strategic weapon more powerful than her aircraft. The avalanche wasn't kinetic. It was industrial. And it was unstoppable. August 15, 1945. Tokyo Bay. USS Essex, Yorktown, Intrepid, Hornet, Lexington, Bunker Hill, Wasp, Hancock, Richard, and Shangri-La sat at anchor as part of the occupation force. 10 Essex-class carriers, floating evidence of industrial capacity that had redefined naval warfare. The Spanish naval attaches who had counted 8 shipyards in 1941 filed their final report. It read, in part, the United States constructed 17 Essex-class fleet carriers in 39 months, utilizing 11 different shipyards and revolutionary mass production techniques. This achievement represents not merely quantitative superiority, but a qualitative transformation in naval construction philosophy. Traditional shipbuilding doctrine must be considered obsolete. The final numbers stagger comprehension. Total Essex-class program. 24 carriers ordered. 17 completed before war's end. 7 completed. 1946–1950 total program cost. $1.76 billion, approximately $28 billion in 2024 dollars, cost per carrier. Approximately $70 to $75 million, $1.1 to $1.2 billion in 2024 dollars. For comparison, a single Iowa-class battleship cost $100 million and took 36 to 40 months to build. The Americans got more strategic capability from an Essex-class carrier in 16 months for less money. Industrial capacity metrics. Peak production, 1944. 3 carriers under construction simultaneously at single yards, Philadelphia. 5 carriers commissioned in single 6-month period. Total shipyard employment on Essex-class program. Over 180,000 workers. Steel consumption. 27,100 tons per carrier times 17 is equal to 460,700 tons of steel. Electrical wiring per carrier. 150-plus miles piping per carrier. 250-plus miles of various sizes. To contextualize production speed. The British built 6 fleet carriers 1937 to 1945, including completion of pre-war designs. Average construction time, 42 months. The Japanese built 4 fleet carriers from scratch 1937 to 1945, plus conversions. Average construction time, 40-plus months. The Americans built 17 Essex-class carriers in 39 months. Average construction time, 16 months. Post-war assessment by Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet. The Essex class was not our most sophisticated weapon. It was our most decisive. These ships, and the industrial system that created them, demonstrated to our enemies that American power was not a matter of individual heroics or tactical genius. It was mathematical inevitability. Soviet observers, studying American industrial capacity for post-war planning, noted with alarm, the Americans did not merely outproduce the Axis powers. They redefined what production means in modern warfare. They proved that in industrial war, the factory is more important than the battlefield. But perhaps the most telling assessment came from the former enemy. Admiral Somu Toyoda, final commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, interrogated after the war. We studied American shipyards. We counted their slipways. We estimated their steel production. We calculated their labor availability. We made one fatal error. We assumed they would build ships the way we built ships. They did not. They built ships the way they built automobiles. By the time we understood this, we were already defeated. The lasting innovations of the Essex-class program. 1. Mass production of capital ships. Proved large, complex vessels could be standardized and produced at scale. 2. Modular construction. Pioneered prefabrication techniques now standard in shipbuilding worldwide. 3. Rapid workforce training. Demonstrated skilled labor could be created faster than traditional apprenticeship models suggested. 4. Integrated logistics. Developed fleet train concepts that enabled sustained operations far from home ports. 5. Design for production. Showed that good enough and buildable defeats perfect but slow. Post-war service underscored the design's soundness. 14 of 24 Essex-class carriers served into the 1950s and beyond. Several were modernized with angled flight decks, steam catapults, and jet aircraft capability. USS Lexington, CV-16, served until 1991, a 49-year career. USS Oriskany, CV-34, served in Vietnam. The class that was merely adequate in 1943 adapted to fight wars no one had imagined when they were designed. One final statistic reveals the program's true impact. In December 1941, the U.S. Navy possessed 7 aircraft carriers. In August 1945, the U.S. Navy possessed 28 fleet carriers, 17 Essex-class, plus older types, and 71 escort carriers. In that same period, Japan went from 10 carriers to 0 operational carriers. That's not arithmetic. That's exponential mathematics applied to industrial warfare. December 7, 1941. Spanish naval analysts counted 8 American shipyards and calculated replacement rates of 4 to 5 carriers annually. August 15, 1945. 10 Essex-class carriers sat in Tokyo Bay, with 7 more completing construction, and the analysts who had counted yards understood what they'd missed. You don't count yards. You count will. And when a nation decides its survival depends on production, the factory floor becomes the most decisive battlefield of all. The Essex class didn't just win a war. It proved that in modern industrial conflict, the nation that builds fastest wins, regardless of who fights bravest. 17 carriers in 3 years didn't end Japan's hope. It ended the era when naval warfare was about individual ships instead of industrial systems. And no navy has forgotten the lesson since.